We'll call this council meeting to order at 6 p.m. I need a motion for the adoption of the minutes, please.
Resolved that the minutes of the regular meeting of council held at City Hall on January 27th, 2020 be adopted as circulated.
Moved by Councillor Buds and seconded by Councillor Meyer. All those in favor? And that's carried. We have no delegations this evening and no public hearings, so we're going to move right into committees. First up is Finance Legislative Property Committee. Councillor Buds, please.
Thank you. So at last committee meeting, I did discuss our audit plan, and so I was making recommendation to support the plan as outlined. And so there's no significant changes year over year, and we've worked with this firm on many occasions, so very comfortable with it, both from myself and I know from administration standpoint. So it is a recommendation of your committee, and I so move that the Council of the City of Portage la Prairie approve the audit service plan with Myers, Norris and Penny for the completion of the 2019 financials and consolidated financial statements.
Moved by Councillor Buds and seconded by Councillor Meyer. Any questions or comments on the motion? All those in favor of the motion? And that's carried.
And that does conclude my report tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Buds. I'm going to move into city planning and economic development. Councillor Meyer, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. We did bring these building reports to committee at last council meeting, so it's really just for information only. Nothing has changed. So there's no questions. We can certainly file them as presented. And
Those were record-breaking numbers. Is that correct?
they were, yes, now that you've asked, no, all joking aside, it really is exciting again to see. I know I say that every time, but it was the end of the year, and I don't think I need to repeat it, but it's pretty exciting.
And that concludes your reports, Councillor
That
Meyer?
concludes the first portion of my report. Second portion of my report, Your Worship, is the fourth quarter report for PRED for 2019. Once again, we have our new EDO and Executive Director of the Portage Regional Economic Development, Eva O'Leary. This report was brought to committee meeting, last council meeting as well. Nothing has changed. If there's any questions, if there's no questions, we would just file it as presented. And that, Your Worship, would be the end of my report.
Thank you, Councillor Meyer. Community Services Committee, Councillor Draycott, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. This evening I do have fourth quarter reports for Community Services Committee. We did have the Youth Councillor discuss her fourth quarter report with us last meeting. We do also have a report from PCRC that I did trudge my way through a little bit last meeting, but as we do have representation from PCRC this evening, I would ask if there was anything to add to the report that was presented. I think I did an okay job of outlining the happenings of the very, very busy PCRC. Thank you. And then, of course, we do have Heritage Committee report on there, fourth quarter report, which we did review as well. Mr. Kostachuk actually represents that as well, if there was anything that he would like to add to the fourth quarter, but we did review it as well. Thank you. And Parks Committee was reviewed, as well as Public Art. So unless any questions have come up about fourth quarter reports that we did review last council meeting, then that would conclude my report this evening.
Thank you, Councillor Draycott. Waterworks Committee, this evening, Councillor Wall is away, so that's Councillor Draycott.
Thank you, Your Worship. There is nothing for the Waterworks Committee this evening.
Thank you. Transportation Committee, Councillor Meyer, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. The Transportation Committee has nothing to report.
Thank you. Public Safety Committee, Councillor Knox.
Thank you, Your Worship. We did go over in committee last time the fourth quarter report from the RCMP, so unless there's any questions on that, we will move on from that. You will notice that we did talk about the bylaw enforcement report that we had in committee last time, and we had mentioned that there was some things in the report that were some discrepancies that we were going to look into, and we just decided that we weren't going to bring it to council tonight, but there has been a lot of work done to figure out that report and what's happening, and we're making headway on that, so I'm expecting it to hopefully be at next council meeting. If you have questions on that, but other than that, that's where we're at. And last at the committee, we also talked about sending our emergency plan for approval. So administration has reviewed and updated our City of Portage la Prairie emergency plan, which was approved by council in 2018. Once accepted by council, the updated plan will be sent to Emergency Measures Organization for their records. A couple of things to note is that the Emergency Social Services resource section containing more information regarding emergency contacts has been added. The EOC emergency team contacts have been updated. So it is committee's recommendation that the City Council of the City of Portage la Prairie accept the emergency plan and authorize administration to send the plan to EMO, and I so move.
Moved by Councillor Knox and seconded by Councillor Buds. Any questions or comments on the motion? All those in favor of the motion? And that's carried.
Thank you, Your Worship. If there's no questions, that ends my report.
Thank you, Councillor Knox. We have no deferred business this evening. However, we have one item of new business. This comes under Finance, Legislative Property Committee. Councillor Buds, please.
Thank you. So the item this evening is to approve a lease agreement with Manitoba Hydro Electric Board. And so just for some analysis and background, Manitoba Hydro would like to enter into a 4-year lease agreement with the city for the use of a portion of city land, and that's approximately 2 acres, 1.79, and there is a Schedule A to review that. And I guess council can understand that the purpose of this would be to install and maintain a transmission line, and no stranger to the importance of this given the events of this past October, and we see lots of work in our community going on. So the agreement would commence February the 10th and would end February 1st, 2024 with an annual rent of $1,300. So it is a recommendation of the committee, and I so move that the Council of City of Portage la Prairie approve the 4-year lease agreement with the Manitoba Hydroelectric Board for $1,300 per year for the primary purpose of installing, maintaining, and operating a transmission line, and that the Mayor and Manager of Administration be authorized to execute the lease agreement on behalf of the City of Portage la Prairie.
Moved by Councillor Buds and seconded by Councillor Meyer. Any questions or comments on the motion? All those in favor of the motion? And that's carried. We have no old business, so we will adjourn council at 6:08 p.m. We're going to move right into committee. We'll call committee to order at 6:09 p.m. First up is Finance, Legislative Property Committee. Councillor Buds, please.
Thank you. Your committee has nothing to report this evening.
Okay. City Planning and Economic Development. Councillor Meyer.
City Planning and Economic Development Committee has nothing to report, Your Worship.
Thank you. And Community Services Committee. Councillor Draycott, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. On the docket for our next council meeting is we will have the appointment of the Municipal Noxious Weeds Inspector and Sub-Inspectors. So as council knows, this is a requirement for every municipality annually that by March 1st that we do need to appoint our noxious weed inspector and our sub-inspectors and notify the appropriate entities about who that will be this year. So that will be coming to council next meeting. And then we do actually have a couple of presentations this evening. So our first presentation,
excuse me,
I
Your Worship.
apologize.
Just one question with regards to that appointment. I know we do this every year, but is it a requirement to have this submitted to the province of Manitoba that council actually makes these appointments, and this is not something that can be delegated to administration? I find it somewhat, does the city of Winnipeg have to let the province of Manitoba through a council meeting resolution of all of their appointment of noxious weeds inspectors? I find that hard to believe.
I'm going to ask our city manager to comment on that.
Through your worship to Councillor Buds, I'll take a secondary look at that, but as my understanding of the Municipal Act, we do have require a council resolution, but I will take a secondary look at it.
Thank you.
And so my first presentation this evening, I'd like to call up Guy Moffat, Maureen Owens, and Mike Touchette for the Discovery Patch presentation, if you will.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. We're here to talk to you about the creation of a new community space. So the front piece, the front field in front of Red River College, formerly Victoria School was at one point in time an athletic field for an elementary school. When the college took it over, there was chain link fence around the front of the property, as well as a baseball diamond. And although it was used by some of the local residents, it was a little bit off-putting. So the college has been interested in rehabilitating that space and making it part of the community. That corner of our city has fairly little in the aspect of community parks. There's a small green space beside the East End 7-Eleven, but pretty much that's it. So since the removal of the chain link fence, it has become a bit more of a community space. It's being used by community members in that corner for a variety of things, mostly activity and some leisure. And there's been a wish to further rehabilitate that space so that it is more welcoming and has more wide applications. So in 2015, we had the chain link removed, and with the dream of doing more with that space. And then I was approached by Michelle Touche in 2016, asking me if I'd be interested in seeing some community garden space, some raised garden beds placed there. Some of the individuals at Prairie Welcome House, did I say that right? Yes. Use community garden space, but it's at Good Shepherd Parish, and they found it just too far to walk in order to maintain. And for a number of reasons, funding and things got busy, those raised gardens didn't happen. Michelle and I had been talking throughout time, as well as PCRC had expressed an interest, and then in 2019, Maureen Owens with Southern Healthy Living also joined the conversation, and then we were able to form a committee of stakeholders and found some additional stakeholders and started putting together our thought and our vision for what the space is going to be. As part of the process, we have developed a formal committee, and we've also done some homework. So the vision, wow, this isn't advancing. Whoops. There we go. The vision for the Discovery Patch, the space in front of the college, is an inclusive community garden where all people can connect with nature, their neighbors, where food is grown with a spirit of sharing and learning. Our mission is to be a place to nourish mind and body and to strengthen the community by fostering an appreciation of Indigenous and newcomer culture. People are encouraged to pass knowledge from one generation to the next by cultivating respect for the land as well as the environment. The values that we set up for the organization is healthy, affordable, and accessible food, healthy respect for our land and value and nature, healthy relationship with our neighbors, as well as a healthy appreciation for teaching and learning. The Discovery Patch, as I have been calling it, was the name that we came up with after a very long committee meeting, a lot of soul searching and a lot of experimentation. And what we decided on was a name that isn't a community garden, because it's not just a community garden. It isn't just a place for self-reflection and for tranquility, because it's more than that. We felt that the creation of the name Discovery Patch was going to be very unique for a very unique space, and it would also be reminiscent of where people would be going. It wouldn't be mistaken as time goes on and people get used to what the Discovery Patch is all about.
All right, my name is Maureen Owens, as Guy mentioned, and I represent a few hats here tonight. So I work for Southern Health in the Public Health Department, and I chair the Community Food Matters group in Portage, which is a food insecurity group, and then I'm part of the Discovery Patch Committee. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit tonight about Portage as a community and the health of our community, and make that link as to why we feel this garden will be a good thing for our people. Okay. Can I back up?
Oh, there we go. Just
Oh,
roll
I
that.
see.
Roll that.
Okay, thanks. All right, so one of the things that I'm basing some of my numbers on tonight is the community health assessment, which our region is legislated to do. We do that every 4 years, and the new one just came out in 2019, so these numbers are fresh. We keep track of the determinants of health, the social determinants of health. So we used to say people were healthy, you know, they managed their blood pressure, cholesterol, they exercised, they refrained from tobacco, those kind of things. But we now know that the biggest predictor of health is actually income. So income is one of the social determinants of health, which we track. So when we look at Portage la Prairie and the population compared to Manitoba, the poverty rate for Portage is 20%, and the Manitoba average is 15%. So we do have a high poverty rate here. I won't go into the medium income, but those numbers are up there if you're interested. The basic premise, I guess, is that if we're looking at the socioeconomic status over time, Portage fares worse than the Manitoba average, and that worsening is increasing over time. So those are some stats on poverty in Portage. So poverty affects a community. Of course, we know that. High rates of poverty result in many social health issues for its residents. It's an important indicator because it's often associated with a household's ability to buy nutritious food. So when you consider children going to school and that household, does not have enough income, there are kids, of course, going to school without eating. That affects their learning, which then affects the income that they'll be able to earn later in life. So it's very connected, and often one builds on the other. High poverty results in high stress, which can result in many mental health issues. A lot of people can turn to then substances to cope with those mental health issues, and then we have addiction in our community, which of course we see. And I just want to point out, we all suffer when our fellow neighbors are left behind. So it's not just those who are living in poverty, it's everyone, it's our whole community. So our healthcare system, our justice system, social services, lost productivity and lost opportunity. Some of the protective factors that we feel this garden will bring to the community and our neighbors. It creates opportunities for people to obtain seasonal healthy food. So there's going to be, Michelle will talk more about this, but there's going to be orchards, which are going to be free for the picking. The raised garden beds, which are available to communities, families. There's going to be small fruits and a herb garden, and so people can go in there and access food, grow their own food. A couple of the boxes that are going to be built will be food that'll be donated to the Salvation Army Food Bank. And then, of course, there's the free pantry there on 5th Avenue as well that will receive some of those produce. We'll create a flourishing mental health environment. So here we see opportunities for social connection. So these are protective factors when it comes to our mental health. They're evidence-based. It's not just fluff. It actually is true. People, when they have a space to make social connections, visit with each other, get to know their neighbors, it's good for their mental health. There'll be green space, nature, shade, and of course we'll have some cultural artifacts and signage as well. We want it to be inclusive, diverse, where we welcome Indigenous culture and then newcomer culture as well. And I'll just introduce, this part. So I took a look at your 15-year community sustainability plan, and I went through that and looked at, I think you call them our desired future, kind of your goals for the city. And I picked out the ones that I thought matched the Discovery Patch. So these are from your plan. You hope to create opportunities for residents to obtain seasonal healthy local food. Check, we'll do that. Preserve green space while creating opportunities for enjoyment for residents and visitors. Yep. be a welcoming community for residents and new immigrants, and finally, to maintain and improve age-friendly status. So all of our boxes will be accessible. They'll be at the right height. There's room for wheelchairs, walkers to get through. And we'll target some of the population, the folks that are living in the apartments, some seniors there, and they will have access to the garden and be able to share their knowledge with others. And I'll just introduce our committee. Guy made reference to it, but this is who we have on our committee. Portage Learning and Literacy, so they represent newcomers to our community. Community Food Matters, I talked about. Southern Health, Red River College, Jeffrey's Nurseries. We have Indigenous representation, so Cornell Pache from the community coordinator and coalition member. We have Métis representation. So Kevin J. Way has helped us pick out what plants we want to put and what kind of cultural artifacts we want in there. And finally, the Portage la Prairie Garden Club. So we have a wide variety of people on our committee, and yeah, we think it's a good representation. All right, I'll turn it over to Michelle.
My wife never allows me to handle the remote, so I'm going to need help here. All right. Okay, so you have all the same picture, right? I'm French Canadian, so I got to talk with my hands. So in the center, we have a medicine wheel, or probably the right term would be a medicine circle. It will be in 4 quadrants, east, west, north, south. There'll be the different colors associated with each quadrant. There also will be sage, sweetgrass, red willow, asters. So all plants that are from our First Nation. We'll also have in the middle here, you could see a Red River cart from the Métis. We have already have a teepee that's going to be set up in this area. We are hoping to get some buffalo rubbing stone. Apparently, there were quite a few of them in the 1800s in Portage la Prairie, and they put it on the train and they sent them to PEI, to one of their museum there in the area for buffalo. So we're hoping to maybe, if we go forward, that we could get one back. So this is right in the center. It will be a core presentation. We want the whole thing to be a learning. So we want to learn about the First Nation and the Métis. Eventually we will have sign what's the Red River cart means, the teepee means, the medicine circle, what it means. The next one, please. We'll also have a green space. So basically these are pathways. I'll come back to that later. These are small boulders, and the boulders will be about 18 inches, 2 feet round, for children to sit on and to climb on and to run around. And right here you will have benches for mothers to be close to the children, keeping an eye on the children, right beside a parking lot. Next, please. Okay, that's the pergolas. That's maybe more the mental health aspect. We will have 2 pergola, one with an open roof, one with a closed roof. There will be some type of wall that is not full. It will be more lattice work where vines will grow, but it will be an environment where you could calm down. Somebody who is, they call that friendship benches, will be in this area, and you will have a view of the garden. Next, please. This will be the fruit trees. So apparently I know a few things about apples and plum, so we're going to go with a dwarf apple. It's not smaller apple, it's just the tree is dwarfed. So instead of being 25 feet, it'll be 15. And then we will be easier to pick because people will come and pick. And so what I visualize is the same principle that you see when you get into a park and they say forest fire danger. They'll say extreme low the dial. So we will have fruit ready for picking, apple. And then we'll move the screen to plum, or we'll say raspberry ready, or asparagus ready in the spring. So we will have a dial system. We're hoping to get all First Nation and all the students to do the planting of the garden. If they could plant the trees, if they could plant the small fruit, we we hope they will take ownership of the garden. Next, please. This area will be for small fruit. So we're talking hascat, honeyberry, saskatoon, strawberry, asparagus. And again, all of this will be free to pick as they come along. Next, please. These are the raised garden. About a third of them will be in only 6 inches high. Another third 12 inch, and then 18 inches. So young families, 6 inch, is good enough to walk over with children and do your gardening. 12 inch, 18 inches probably better for people getting close to my age. 18 inches, nice. But the one thing we want to do is mix the neighborhood. So we want to invite the newcomers. We want the Filipinos to come. We want people from Africa, El Salvador, to all join in. And what we will do is we'll identify which raised bed is for the Filipinos. So people could actually go see the type of vegetable they eat. So it's a learning session. It's just part of the learning process. Next, please. And these are the walkways. They will be 8 feet wide. We'll put a geotextile pack, gravel, 1/4 inch down. We want it to be accessible for wheelchairs. We want it to be scooters. We want it accessible to bikes. Okay, next. Any question on the function? No? Okay. Thank you.
And this is our last screen, although we are bringing it to you for information purposes. There is also the ask. Our ask is where the city can help out is access to water for watering the vegetable gardens and the fruit gardens. If there is a hose bib at the lift station on the northwest corner, we're going to ask for the city to help out from their parks department to water the trees when they're coming around and watering the trees on the boulevard. We're also asking for a donation of bricks for when the sidewalks are redone in the downtown and the material is being raised up. We'll be able to use those bricks for edging. And last but not least, compost material as well to mix in the gardens from our community compost area, and financial assistance as well. And that is the end of our presentation.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation tonight. While you are here, I would ask if anybody from council has any questions.
Thank you very much. Not really a question, but just a comment, of course, and to, I guess, to Guy and to Marina Michelle and your committee, I commend you. I think as Portage continues to grow and we look at ourselves as the inclusive and welcoming community that we are, I believe it's only spaces like this that we take and develop them into something that's a community space. I think just really speaks for what the city is about. So I really commend you guys on the work that you've done up to this point.
Thank you.
So I'll echo Councillor Meyer's comments. Just a couple of questions, though. So is there a timeline that we're looking at for the park?
We're in the process right now of writing grant proposals and getting our committee a little bit more formalized. We hope to have shovels in the ground this spring. We would like to see, we're open to doing a phased approach, but we are hoping that the orchard, small fruit, pathways, as well as the medicine wheel and the sitting areas will be done, as well as the raised gardens on the east and west. The raised gardens at the very front might be a later phase, but we're hoping to get something rolling this summer so it can be planted in full for next year.
And so how do you view the management of this space? Because I do look at it, you know, at the start, it's great, but there'll be some labor that's going to be required ongoing. How do you see managing that process?
Our committee will be managing as far as allocating the raised gardens and so on, but Red River College is going to continue to maintain the grounds as a whole.
And you'll have a formal financial request from the city coming after we know the grants and that type of stuff?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Great job.
I just wanted to say this is a very ambitious plan and project, and I think it's much needed, and I think it's going to be used a lot when it's all put in place. So certainly I want to thank you all for coming out and presenting to council this evening. I think we have a pretty good idea of what that entails, and we'll take a look at what we can do to support this. Thank you very much. Oh, I'm sorry. Councillor Knox.
That's okay. I've said it before, so I'll just say it publicly that I love the name. I think it's a very inclusive name. And now that I've seen, I love the logo. So well done.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you. And from a seat on the Parks Committee table, I can tell you that this sort of collaboration is something that the Parks Committee is very excited about. We often have looked at different areas of the city that are needing more accessible green space, and this is just a fabulous use of space that hasn't been utilized to its maximum potential for many years. So I was very excited to see it. It actually reminded me a lot of the Assiniboine Park in Winnipeg, different aspects of that, how it's a congregating place and there are art pieces as well as plant life there. And so that really was reminiscent of that when I was reading through the report. I'm very excited to see this happen. So congratulations.
Wonderful, thank you. And there's just a couple of pieces that we didn't have time to point out. There's light standards as well as cameras that are in the main area of the park, and Jared St. Pierre has helped us with addressing or applying the SEPTED principles as well. So we're trying to think of all the
Excellent.
angles on it.
Very good. And then I would move on. We do also have a Heritage Committee presentation this evening for natural interpretive signs. So I would call Mr. Kostachuk as well as Nicole Nelson and some other additional PCI students to the podium.
Thank you. I'm here on behalf of the Portage Heritage Advisory Committee, and we've taken on a project that deals with natural heritage. And it's a really nice fit for our previous presentation because it also deals with land-based learning. I'm going to introduce Nicole Nelson. The idea for this came from a presentation by Gord Goldsboro, and Nicole had him in her room. And as I was sitting there, I realized how much I didn't really understand about Crescent Lake. So we had this idea of working to produce some mock-ups of signs that could potentially be put along the Crescent for people to learn about the Crescent. So I'll invite Nicole up, and you can take it from there.
Yeah, sounds good. So I teach grade.
I just need you 1 minute. You could. This should advance. Should self-advance. If it's not, if somebody could just, you'll do it.
Or do you want to sit there? You can sit there. Okay. Hey, so I teach high school sciences at PCI. James kind of came to me with this idea once we had Gordon in our classroom, and we kind of thought, how could we use this as a learning experience, but also to benefit the community? So in grade 10 science, we get to teach the students about ecosystems. So what we did was I took the students invertebrate dipping in the Crescent Lake, which I honestly had no idea how that was going to go. In university, I learned that if you see a lot of different types of invertebrate in a lake, that usually means it has a pretty healthy ecosystem going. It means it has lots of biodiversity. So I took the kids out this fall, and we went invert dipping, and we found a lot of different things like freshwater shrimp and different type of beetles and water fleas, and it is a lot of fun. From there, we went back to the classroom, and we just generated a list of different topics that they thought we could make these signs for. It was a really large list. It ranged from like different bird species to invasive species to how to keep the lake clean, why does the lake stink sometimes, to the different types of organisms that we have in it. From there, since it was our first year doing it, I just kind of let them have a little bit more free will. As long as it was about an ecosystem, they could choose any topic that they wanted to. I'm hoping that this would put a more positive outlook on the Crescent Lake, or how I like to look at it sometime, the Crescent Wetland. So I'm really hoping that it would be a really good educational walk for people to go down and just be able to read signs about things. So for example, one sign that they did was the difference between a caddisfly and, a damselfly and a dragonfly. A lot of people don't know the difference, but it was a good learning experience for them to get to do that. I'm just going to invite them up one by one. So I'm going to invite Kylan Schindel up first.
Hi, I'm Kylan, and I did my poster on easy ways to keep our lake clean. Here are some simple things we can do. Don't litter, compost, discourage invasive species, pick up after your pets, and rake your leaves away from the curb. Thanks.
And invite up Sydney
Good job.
Rumpley to go next.
Hi, I'm Sydney, and I did my sign on cormorants. I learned actually a lot about them, like how people used to kill them because they thought they were bad, like tens of thousands of them. But actually, they're actually kind of good for the environment because they eat a lot of invasive species and fish that like sport fishing and fisheries don't actually like to catch. And we've actually built up our population a lot, and there's a lot of them at the Crescent Lake right now.
And then I'm going to invite up Emily Walter.
Hi, my name is Emily, and so the poster I created was about ecosystems and biodiversity. And so one of the main things that I learned was the difference between abiotic and biotic. So abiotic is the non-living things and biotic is the living things. And this is a bit about my poster.
Thank you. So it was only our first year doing this project. They had some really great turnouts for it. There was a lot of different variety in the poster. I would be interested to continue to see what we could get for more posters since it was just year one. But I also do think it'd be just a great opportunity to have like different schools from around Portage or daycares be able to go along the Crescent walking path there and see all these educational signs along the way.
In terms of our next step, what we're going to do is you have copies of all the posters that were submitted, and I think over the next few months we'd like to narrow it down to a few that are of particular interest to council, and then we're going to connect the students with a graphic designer, and then we'll work on what the final signage would look like that could potentially go along either the new causeway or along the walking paths that we have. And I have to say I learned a lot. I did not know that there were freshwater shrimp in the Crescent. I also didn't know the difference between a diving and a dabbling duck. So there is a lot to learn on our Crescent when you start looking at it through the perspective of a biome rather than just as something that, you know, historically we haven't treated very well. Any questions?
So just to clarify, this classroom committee would be coming back to council with suggestions for signage, or you are asking council to have suggestions for signage?
Well, actually, we could do both. You have a series of signs that were submitted in the PowerPoint. So you could, if some of you have some that you like, you could contact us and just say, you know, we'd like to have one about why you don't feed the ducks as an example. That might be a sign that resonates with council, or the importance of salamanders, things like that. But we could also take, if there are some things that you'd like us to investigate, I think we could definitely do that.
Questions? Councillor Buds?
Just a comment, I think it's a great project and a different perspective for our lake, which we call it a lake, but I liked your terminology of it because it's so much more than that. So my recommendation is to continue on with your process and narrow it down like Mr. Kostrick has, and then coming back to council, because there is a lot of good information on here, and so much of it people just don't know. So great job.
Just one question, one comment. So freshwater shrimp, I saw everybody get all interested in that. How big are these?
They're, you know what, it ranges. They can be really tiny to maybe almost an inch. Like in the spring when we went out there, the first time I took them invert dipping, there were some really large ones. But in the fall time when the population started to diminish before winter time, they were just smaller at that point. But yeah, not big enough to eat, that's for sure. So yeah.
Okay. I really think the information provided for why you shouldn't feed ducks and geese, I think maybe that's the first sign. I think a lot of us grew up thinking it was a good idea to give bread to ducks and geese, and that covers it pretty well. Councillor Knox, you had a question?
You're ignoring me today.
How could I?
I'm all by myself over here, so I just commend you on this. This is probably, in my time on council, one of my favorite presentations, because I like to hear somebody putting a positive spin on our lake or pond or wetland, whatever you want to call it. Somebody said something the other day, it was on a different topic when it was talking about crime in our community and talking about this is the generation that has to make the type of positive changes. So if this generation can make a positive spin on our lake, I think it's nothing but great. And I vote for the salamanders because I like them. So thank you very much and good job.
Councillor Meyer.
Thank you, Your Worship, and as well, no question, just a comment. Growing up on the lake and being a part of Portage for as long as I have, I never realized there was many things as there was actually, as I've seen in the short presentation. Once we become known, of course, as Island on the Prairies, and that takes more of a tourism effect, I think to have something like this to educate our public and educate our citizens and certainly the tourists and so on. So I want to, like my fellow colleagues around the table, really commend you on putting a project like this together, and full speed ahead. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you. I think we're going to have signs on the crescent that says, "Don't eat the shrimp." But
why?
Maybe you can eat them. So that is two very great presentations, and I would just like to commend both of those committees because that is something that has come back to council as positives and things that the committee can do to grow our city and educate our city and make positive changes within. So this has been a great evening for me, for council. One final note from the Community Services Committee, I would like to ask Ms. Davison if she has anything to add. I know that we're just past exams, but any updates on the high school?
Yes, thank you. I would like to highlight that I have a meeting with Mr. Waldvogel this week to discuss a date for the Meet Your Counselors event that I will be hosting at PCI. So I will have more information on that very soon for you all. Thank you.
Thank you. And that would conclude Community Services Committee this evening, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Draycott. And Waterworks Committee, Councillor Draycott.
Thank you, Your Worship. Waterworks Committee has nothing this evening.
Thank you. And Transportation Committee tonight for Councillor Espy. Councillor Meyer, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. And on behalf of the Transportation Committee, you will see our 2019 Solid Waste Annual Report. Not quite sure why that comes after the Crescent Lake stuff, but it's actually, I'm kidding, it's a really good report. It really kind of talks about how the city funds and operates several of the solid waste programs, and of course, including residential solid waste collection, our curbside collection, curbside yard waste, and so on. I won't go through the whole thing, but it's really interesting read when you look at the amount of waste that we do use or collect, and you will see that there is the comparison for month to month from the solid waste collectibles to yard waste. And just one thing that's really neat to point out is that during the Christmas tree pickup program, a total of 238 Christmas trees were recycled through the city as well. So that turns into actually 192,000 kilograms of tree waste. So it's amazing when you see it picked up, taken to the burn site, or composted and so on. It's just it's amazing job that the operations department does on that. So my colleague Councillor Espy will be bringing that to council next council meeting.
I think Councillor Draycott, you had a question.
Thank you, Your Worship. I actually get this question a lot from different people within the community when you talk about solid waste and recycling and composting. And quite often the question that I hear is, why can't we change our recycling to weekly? And my answer is that it is a contract. So my question for the citizens of Portage would be, is that something that the city would consider, is changing our pickups for recycling in our future contract, or is that something that we have looked at already?
Through your worship to Councillor Draycott, typically our recycling and waste agreements are on 3-year terms. I believe we just recently signed a 3-year term. Primarily it comes down to cost. You know, if you double the amount that you are picking up recycling, you're increasing the cost to the taxpayers. And at this point, I don't think there's been a lot of asks to administration to look at that. That's definitely something when we reissue the RFP in the future, we could get a secondary cost on what it would cost to do it every week. But at this point, that hasn't been asked at this point.
Now, in case people don't know it, you can put out as many bins as you want. So if people have 2 bins and they're finding they've got 2.5, they could certainly add another bin, and there's no change in cost, whether it's 1 bin or 5, it's the same cost. Councillor Knox, did you have a question?
Mostly a comment. I just wanted to point out the Christmas tree, and I like the extended life of the ingenuity of the Christmas trees on skating for the Crescent. So they got to live a little longer. So Thank you.
I did have one question. The numbers for yard waste pickup are down significantly from last year. Is there any, do we know why? Okay, so this year's number is closer to previous years? Okay.
I mean,
Okay. Do you have a comment?
just administration looked at that number. It popped up as to us as well, and we looked at the 5-year average, and last year's numbers were consistent with what we'd seen in the previous 5-year average. So
Okay.
we believe probably last year was either an error or anomaly.
Thank you. And if I can just maybe add one more thing, Your Worship, is, and it's just something that I'm not aware of, was electronic waste at the Portage and District Recycling always accepted, or if I read it here, was it just accepted in their contract when we signed with them in 2018?
Would you like to comment on that?
I'll probably refer that question to Ms. Laquie Jobin.
Okay. So if it is brand new, it's just something I think that is really recognizable that our citizens are aware, because it does say in December 2018, a new contract was signed with Portage and District Recycling, Inc., and the electronic waste was included with recycling as a monthly flat fee. So as we know, in today's world, electronic waste is getting more and more and more. It's really nice to be able to have an outlet for it. So please do not throw it in the regular garbage. Thank you. And that, Your Worship, is my report.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Meyer. And Public Safety Committee, Councillor Knox.
Thank you, Your Worship. Public safety has nothing to report this evening.
Thank you. The clock on the computer is extremely tiny. So committee is adjourned at 6:48 p.m. Thank you for coming out, everybody.